The Bulk Report.
Tonight, should you be allowed to use your super to buy a house? Pauline Hanson causes a Labor meltdown. Plus, Anthony Albanese's latest lies exposed by the woman who embarrassed him on her podcast, and the woman who he won't want to meet now, the world leader in December's G20 meeting. Donald Trump praises yet another dictator and orders US forces to cut back war exercises that make that poor little dictator look bad. And how the Logies tell us Conservatives they are not welcome. But first, two stories today gave us two sides of the same threat. First one was this: the growing fears that the Royal Commission into Anti-Semitism is not a forensic inquiry but tokenistic, something unlikely to deliver solutions to the anti-Semitism crisis. Well, I warned about that just from the start, you know, and I've got even more sceptical since. I mean, just 4 months to go, and this Royal Commission still has not investigated the role of Islam, the role of immigration in feeding this deadly Jew hatred here. It has not grilled a single government minister for what they did or failed to do as the hatred built up to an explosion. Which brings me to the other article. That's the point of the other report, that the Albanese government's gun laws have failed, that New South Wales is the only state to adopt Anthony Albanese's gun buyback. And I've got to say, no wonder. And once again, this is looking at the guns, not at the people pulling the trigger, and many of them imported. Albanese's gun laws essentially punish the innocent to make our Prime Minister look like it was doing something, anything, after the Bondi massacre of Jews, allegedly by Islamist gunmen, including a Muslim from India. So Albanese's useless plan, purely performative, was to ban people from owning more than 4 guns, as if the Bondi gunmen wouldn't then have killed Jews at Bondi if they only had 4 guns. Oh, no, we can't do it, we need 6. Now, the failure there was that they had even 1, that they weren't checked properly. But the worst of this is that these gun laws are really to distract you. It's like, hey, look at those wicked gun laws over there. All these guns, let's get them. Don't look at the gunmen. Most certainly don't look at the politicians who let those families in. All of which brings me to news last night, which, if you saw it, you might have thought, well, this, you might not have figured this was related to all of this. It's news that highlights the real problem. In Melbourne, crime family figure, the head of the family, Fadi Hadara, born in Lebanon to a Sunni Muslim family, was shot several times outside his home. He's now in a critical condition in hospital. Police worry that the gunman that shot him was hired by the gang led by Iraqi-born Qasem Hamad, now back in Iraq and in jail there. Now, these two gangs have been at war in Melbourne to control the illegal tobacco trade. Not just there, by the way. They've been torching dozens and dozens and dozens of shops and staging multiple shootings. Got to ask then, what difference would the gun laws make here? Or did the men who shot Hadara last night or killed his brother 7 years ago, do they need more than even 1 or 2 guns to do this, or even help turn Melbourne into a battlefield? All the shooting up of nightclubs and restaurants we've seen, including 4 shootings in just 1 week in July. If you think I'm cherry-picking here, drawing a long bow, note that police believe 2/3 of the underworld-linked homicides in Melbourne over the past decade have been connected to Middle Eastern organised crime, imported crime, 2/3. In Sydney, much the same story. There we've seen a gun war between mostly Middle Eastern crime gangs that have killed most of the more than 20 people shot dead in targeted shootings between 2020 and 2023. They're the red dots on this map. Blue dots are where others' targets survived, would you believe? That is a war between 2 families also originally from Lebanon. Now, I know this doesn't apply to most Middle Eastern immigrants, but sometimes it is like we have imported not just people, but a culture, and some streets of our cities, as a consequence, are now as dangerous as Beirut. You just look at the names of the Sydney gangland figures shot dead since 2016. I'm not going to show them all, I haven't got time, but check one common factor since the murder of Walid Ahmed 9 years ago. There have been Hamad Assad and Safwan Chabaji, followed by Kemal Barakat. We've told the killings, some implicated the Al Madin crime gang, then kicked up 3 years later with the murder of Mejid Hamzi and the 18 dead gangland figures since, including Taha Sabah, who was shot dead in front of his young son. One gun was enough there as well. Who let these families in? Because it's not just the hate preachers, who let them in as well, like Wissam Haddad, son of Lebanese parents.
If you attack Allah, if you attack our Prophet, our religion, and our fellow brothers and sisters, and if you attack our land, then you are going to be met with men who love death more than you love life.
We made a demographic mistake, and they're the hardest to fix. I mean, listen to that. I mean, it's charming. Eh? Tell me again how diversity makes Australia stronger. I'm all ears. And tell me how taking guns off farmers now makes us safer against people with an us against them mentality, including the few who think that Allah obliges them to kill Jews. No, the government's gun laws, they're just a terrible distraction. The Royal Commission too seems distracted. Why is immigration not on their agenda? Why is the performance of the Labor ministers not under scrutiny too, if the rise in Jew hatred is the issue? I'll give you just one fresh example about the government's role. The government has refused visas to 2 Israeli politicians. Oh, we can't have them. Can't even have the Israeli Justice Minister. Oh, they're just going to raise tensions here. Extreme. But the same government has allowed this alleged American comedian start a tour here next month, despite preaching inflammatory hatred of Israel and conspiracy theories of the kind that anti-Semites have used, like even, the Bondi massacre of Jews, actually a false flag operation. You know, what, Jews shooting Jews?
And of course, we have the Bondi attack. I think I gave pictures to one of your producers, like Arson Ostrovsky, who's like one of those trolls on Twitter. He happened to be on October 7th, a survivor October 7th, and then he posts his picture, a selfie, while he's on the floor, and he has blood all over him. Yeah, that's the picture. Okay, which is obviously looks fake. How can you believe a country that lies 24/7 like this? Israel doesn't just lie to hide the truth. They lie recreationally. They just do because it's fun for them.
The Albanese government has let that poisonous man into the country to spread the word from one end to the other. And meanwhile, the ABC has invited Hassan Piker, another American hate preacher, secular hate preacher, to come on its Planet America show. This is a viciously anti-Israel bigot who defends Islamist terrorists, excuses violence against the US, and advocates the murder of capitalists.
I would vote for Hamas over Israel every single time.
America deserved 9/11, dude. I'm saying.
Kill those and murder those in the street. Let the streets soak in their red capitalist bloods.
Are you surprised the way the ABC has been lately that is going to be an ABC guest? He was already on the ABC last year as well. What on earth is our ABC up to, stoking hatred like that, with people like that, giving them a platform? Now, all this stuff, that should be front and centre for the government and for the Royal Commission if we're serious about fighting Jew hatred. Not gun laws, but immigration, incitement, government policies, and the promotion of hatred by the national broadcaster. I warned last Thursday that the anti-Pauline Hanson protests that day, they were not just, they're school children, they just mean well, getting engaged with politics. So nice. They were ugly, they were vicious, they were intolerant, with threats to execute, kill and spit on the One Nation leader. There was just so much hate.
I'm at the students' protest against Pauline Hanson. Let's hear what they have to say.
Do you guys, what would you do if Pauline Hanson were here today?
I would shoot her.
I would running around with Kill her!
Now, the guy doing the filming, there was a 15-year-old One Nation volunteer, but there you go. The very next day, a 63-year-old woman who works for One Nation at head office, she was attacked when she went to the Echo show in Brisbane. She was wearing One Nation gear. Now, I can't give her name. She's been so traumatised and is so scared. There's even doubts she'll ever come back again to work. 3 young women, and she thinks in the late teens, no older than 21, abused her, and one spat on her. Then a young man, same age, grabbed this woman by the wrist, spun her around and punched her so hard, broke at least one of her ribs. A 63-year-old woman. Now, I tell you, if this had happened to a Labor official, this would be all over the news. The ABC would be all over it. But abuse of and violence against One Nation has been so normalised. One Nation has been so demonised that this is so far a tiny story, or mostly ignored. I'm told Fortitude Valley Police are investigating. They say a formal complaint has not yet been lodged, but they're aware of this and they are not going to give out any other information. But like I said last week about the students, you know, when you see this sort of stuff, when you see that hate, when you see the international, socialist alternative movement getting involved, you know that the danger to our future is not Hanson. It is her haters, like some of the people that were demonstrating against her. Joining me is the political panel, Michael Kroger, former Victorian Liberal President, and Holly Hughes, former Liberal Senator, now with One Nation. Holly, what does this alleged assault tell you?
It's actually incredibly frightening, and I think it's disgraceful that this level of hatred is allowed to fester. And, you know, I'll say there are premiers and prime ministers here who will potentially have blood on their hands at some stage because of their complete refusal to take any action when it comes to these kind of threats. Pauline is subjected to them consistently. We see the demonisation of Gina Reinhart. The level of hatred that is allowed to be continuing on is unhinged. But now that it is escalating into acts of violence, now is the time that the political class needs to stand up and say, this kind of behaviour is unacceptable, not like they did when, you know, they had the believe all women except conservative women because they deserve it. It can't be defend all politicians except for One Nation because if anyone attacks them, they deserve it. And unfortunately, that seems to be the prevailing attitude of some in government at the moment.
Seems to be. Michael, here I've given some examples. It's not just violence against Jews, although they have suffered grievously, maybe the worst. But the general culture of violence, the blind eye to violence if it's at the right targets, the incitement of violence, the ABC platforming people of violence, there is something really freaky going on with this country.
Well, it's not only here, Andrew, it's in America too, it's in Britain too, it's in other Western countries. The socialists and to the left of the socialists are so hell-bent on destroying democracies and Western civilisation and Western culture. They go to and promote and incite these extreme acts, and you would not be wrong to conclude perhaps that, you know, acts of violence against people will come out or incited by demonstrations like this. But where are the ministers saying to their government schools, to their headmasters, do not permit kids to leave school to go on these hate-filled demonstrations? Where are the teachers? Where are the parents? Where are the parents' associations? What, to allow all these kids to go along and then, of course, in some cases their lives are going to be ruined because they've been stupid enough and incited enough and angry enough to give interviews saying, you know, kill Hanson. Well, that'll read well in a job application in due course, Andrew. So some of the lives of these kids are going to be ruined because they're attending these demonstrations, all incited by the socialist left, which are now predominant, here and in other Western countries.
To some politics today, the government's new housing taxes in the May budget, that seems to have backfired badly. Housing prices are dropping fast. Bureau of Statistics saying there was a 3% fall in the following 3 months in the number of first home buyers, which the budget was supposed to help, taking out a mortgage. 3% fall, with the National Australia Bank warning of worse chaos to come. But the Housing Minister today refused to admit a mistake and preferred to retail happy anecdotes she allegedly read to the hard stats.
We all read the newspapers of a Sunday morning, and for the first time in my life, they are peppered with article after article about first-time buyers around the country who are going to auctions and winning.
Now, the government doesn't seem to have a clue. It was happily today attacking, Holly, the Pauline Hanson, who yesterday said, let's let people use their super to buy a home, or she even said maybe even help with the cost of living. The coalition says let people use their super to buy a home. It's their money. What do you make of all this?
I mean, that's the point. It is our money that we pump into superannuation. And the surest indicator of a safe and secure retirement, particularly for women that are widowed or divorced, is owning your own home. And if you're able to do that through accessing superannuation, you should absolutely be allowed to do that. The unions don't want it to happen. The Labor government doesn't want it to happen because they're all using those incredible trillions of dollars to pump up their own industry funds and everything about the donations around the unions and the Labor Party. It stinks to high heaven. Absolutely, people should be able to access their super. Having the security of owning your own home as you enter retirement is absolutely what we want to see for Australians. And the reality is, even since the introduction of superannuation, the number of Australians who require a government-funded pension has barely moved. So superannuation in many ways has abjectly failed, and Australians should be able to use their own money.
But, Michael, I think this is going to be a big issue in the election. The Prime Minister certainly wanted to make it so. He was one of many Labor politicians in Parliament today. Here he is.
We know that it is at risk because the Liberals, the Nationals and One Nation all want to decimate universal super. Not only do they want to drag Australians back to the past, they want to damage their future as well.
It's actually true, Michael, obviously, that if you let people use their super to buy a house, they could actually be better off long term with that sort of investment. Although the last time, during the COVID crisis, that people were allowed to do it, let's take some money out of their super to get them by. Gambling, money spent on gambling rose straight after. What do you make of the idea?
It did because of the psychological crisis that COVID brought around as well. Look, Andrew, Albanese simply says, the Coalition and One Nation want to decimate the super scheme. What, by giving people back their own money, access to their own money? This guy's delusional. He's totally delusional. And look, Andrew, back on the housing market, did you see on budget night Jim Chalmers say our tax changes to negative gearing are going to result in the following: hundreds of billions of dollars wiped off the value of property, auction clearance rates plummeting, 5% deposit buyers having been wiped out of their 5% equity, mortgage loan applications plummeting, first home buyer applications plummeting, developers and investors withdrawing from the market. And now one of the banks saying tonight, rents are about to rise 30%. Well, you know what happens, Andrew? We are headed towards an economic crisis in this country because people, when they're feeling poor, they stop spending. JB Hi-Fi, down 12% today because retail sales are falling. Retail sales are falling. Stamp duties are going to collapse. Right, receipts for stamp duties, when you don't have buying properties, you don't pay stamp duty. Their receipts are going to plummet. This government has no idea what they're doing. If any of this was predictable,
and you even missed out one.
Said it to the government, and the government would have said it on budget night. Chalmers would have said, this is all going to happen, but, it's all okay. He had no idea. They have no idea what they're doing, and that's the problem. You elect people to government with no understanding of economics.
You overlooked the fact that rents have also soared. So this is really hitting the poor.
Going up more.
Holly, I'm running out of time, but I've got to show you this. Nikki Osborne, she's come back for a second go of the Prime Minister. She hit him with the truck and now is reversing back over. She got him on a Bush Deep podcast, of course, drinking whiskey, saying he'd like to shag Kylie Minogue, making fun of the Japanese Prime Minister's melons after she gave him one as a president. Albanese claimed on Friday it was ambushed, not least by her question on who he'd like to shag. Here he is.
Prime Minister Nikki Osborne said that she does shag, marry, kill with every guest. Did you and your office know that the question was coming?
No.
Prime Minister, can the voters rely on you to tell them the truth?
Absolutely.
So just to be clear, those questions weren't preloaded You didn't know it didn't have any advance warning?
No.
But Osborne said, no, Albanese knew all about the show and agreed like a shot to come on. Here she is.
And I went, oh, the Prime Minister follows me. Okay, which was quite the shock. And then I'm like, bugger it. I'm going to DM the PM and invite him on my show.
DM the PM.
I'm going to DM the PM. And I did. And he got back to me straight away and went, sure, sounds like a lot of fun. He's watched the show. He knows my podcast. So he knew what he was coming into.
Holly, I'm out of time, but I've got to quickly get a reaction from you.
Can I just reiterate, there's a campaign called Fire the Liar. And if you don't get motivated to donate more now, this guy is an absolute flog. He's a total liar. The fact that he just consistently lies, he actually looked dreadful in that press conference he was doing. So maybe the pressure's getting to him. But, you know, fire the liar, donate money, let's get rid of this idiot.
It's a weird thing. He's got time on his hands if he follows a podcast. Anyway, Michael Kroger, Holly Hughes, thank you very much to you both. Oh, dearie me, that's just so terrible. Anthony Albanese, though, has been so embarrassed by being filmed joking about the Japanese Prime Minister's melons with the gropey hands, you know. There's now one overseas trip, I am sure, he's planned it, but it's become a landmine. He'd be worried. Because in December, Albanese is going to fly to a meeting of the G20 economies, and also there will be Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. Meloni is Italian for melons. And Meloni hasn't minded making that joke of that herself. Albanese was praying hard she doesn't do it with him. Still, if there's a leader, a world leader who appreciates a good melon joke, I guess it is Albo. After the break, Donald Trump sucks up to North Korea's dictator with a massive insult of South Korea. What is going on with this man? Donald Trump's liking for dictators, it was already disturbing enough. You know, how soft he was with Russian war criminal Vladimir Putin, how generous he was about Syria's new leader, a former al-Qaeda terrorist. But now it's really gone rogue. Sucking up to murderous North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, even at the cost of weakening ties with the government of Democratic South Korea. See, the US and South Korea were due today to start joint military exercises in case of an attack by North Korea, maybe even war with China. But Trump has posted this: based on my very good relationship with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, I'm not happy with the fact the United States has long ago agreed to participate in joint military exercises with South Korea. These exercises are not only costly, with much of these costs paid for by the United States of America, as usual, but send a signal that it's totally inappropriate and hostile to a country that, as long as Donald J. Trump has been president, has been unthreatening and respectful. Therefore, and based on the fact that it's too late to cancel, I've instructed Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to substantially reduce the joint military exercises. Honestly, North Korea, unthreatening, it's just been sending missiles and even its own soldiers to help Russia attack Ukraine. Joining me is the country's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of The Australian. Greg, this sounds to me quite shocking and even dangerous. What do you make of it?
Well, Andrew, it's very good to be with you. And I must say, I completely agree with you on this. I think this is one of the most bizarre things Trump has ever said. You know, people who think Trump never does anything wrong think that the weird, amazing, strange things he says are negotiating tactics. But for that to be true, somebody has to believe what he says. But this stuff about North Korea is simply incredible. So at the very same time as he's doing this, punishing South Korea to suck up to North Korea, who he says has never been disrespectful or threatening while he's president, at the very same time, another arm of his administration is planning to impose massive punitive tariffs on anyone who trades with Russia, who does primary trade with Russia. Yet North Korea not only trades with Russia, as you say, it has sent them thousands, tens of thousands of troops to fight in Ukraine. It has sent them missiles. It has sent hundreds of thousands or millions of artillery shells in exchange for high-tech weaponry. At the same time, it's been expanding as rapidly as possible the number of nuclear weapons that it has, and it's been expanding its intercontinental ballistic missile nuclear capability to fire the missiles, even to the point where they could threaten the United States. So how does that? All I can guess, and this is purely a guess without any information, is that there's some back-channel communication going on with North Korea. Trump wants to announce another great, historic, fabulous success in a week or two, and he's doing this as part of that. That's purely a guess, but it's impossible to work out, what's going on in Trump's mind, really.
Well, he told us in his first presidency that he'd sorted out the threat from North Korea's nuclear weapons, and that turned out to be fake. He makes so many fake announcements of peace and deals and whatever, and turns to custard. Now, in this case, he said he wouldn't, it's because South Korea wouldn't help the US get rid of Iran's nuclear program. That, he said, might have something to do with it, might. Look what happened to Israel. They did help the US try to get rid of it, and they got the back of Trump's hand as well. I mean, how can any country dare now to get close to Trump, knowing how erratic he is, and that even when you help him, that's no guarantee of anything?
Yes, Trump has become, sadly, that most pathetic of creatures, a dangerous enemy, but a fatal friend. It is really fatal to be too close to Trump. I think the United States remains our indispensable ally, and we've got to try to keep the strategic alliance there and to keep building relationships with the institutional parts of America that will outlast Trump, such as the Pentagon. And God knows I'm not shy of criticising the Albanese government, but overall I'd say they've handled the American relationship pretty well, and they continue to build a good relationship with the Pentagon. But Trump, I think now he's 80, he's becoming very erratic even by his own standards. He doesn't have any long-term perspective anymore. Everything is tactics. He just wants the announcement rather than the result. And he likes dictators because he knows that he'll still be dealing with them and they can do all kinds of, strange deals with him. Whereas he finds there's not a democratic leader in the world that he is consistently respectful of. And abusing South Korea for not joining the military campaign in Iran, no country in the world joined except Israel, and no country was properly consulted or properly asked. And what did he want South Korea to do anyway? Just send a few extra ships or something? I mean, it wasn't a lack of military resources that stymied the United States in Iran. This is an indication, I think, that the next 2 years, this 3 months leading up to the midterm elections, and then the last 2 years of the Trump presidency, are likely to be very turbulent, very entropic, no pattern, no clear direction. And we're going to need to be smart to negotiate that period.
Without a doubt. Coming back to Australia, Greg, at the top of the show I said there are concerns that the Royal Commission into anti-Semitism isn't going to get into some of the factors driving that Jew hatred. There's been no public examination so far about the texts of Islam. I know it's sensitive, but this is a factor. Or the spread of Jew hatred by hate preachers, no examination of our immigration program, no examination of the actions of ministers or their failure to act. Only 4 months now to go with this Royal Commission. What's your read?
Well, look, I think, Andrew, you make very substantial points there. I kind of half give them a pass for not examining the government ministers. We public will adjudicate on that. I kind of give them a 10% pass for not examining the texts of Islam. I can understand that. But how come they haven't examined any of the critically important texts which have driven radicalisation within Australia from the Muslim Brotherhood or from Hizb ut-Tahrir? How come they haven't examined the sermons of the hate preachers? Just the other day, it was clear that they didn't examine left-wing anti-Semitism. So there is right-wing anti-Semitism, I completely agree with that, but there are two other big drivers of anti-Semitism. Left-wing anti-Semitism based on demonising Israel around the fraudulent ideology of colonisation, and also Islamic anti-Semitism, which has a very long and broad history going back hundreds of years. And if I think they'd be quite happy to catch out any Christians who were behaving in an anti-Semitic fashion, but they seem to just not want to go anywhere near left-wing anti-Semitism, which permeates our universities, or Islamic and Islamist anti-Semitism, which is a great big, broad, strong current of history. And you can't really evaluate modern anti-Semitism if you just rule those subjects out of order.
Absolutely. That's why I think the text of Islam, however sensitive it is, should be a subject of the Royal Commission, because when you look at the hate passages in the Quran, in the Hadith, etc., that might explain why your immigration program might need a little retooling to make sure that the problem doesn't get worse. I mean, but anyway, let's all pretend it's about guns shooting themselves, apparently. Greg Sheridan, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. After the break, how bad can this housing crisis get? Plus, the media club that, really, how the Logies last night made it clear that Conservatives aren't welcome, which sure isn't news to me. Like I said, the Albanese government's Housing Minister Claire O'Neill seems in denial about just how much the government's housing taxes in the May budget have been shredding the housing market. And, you know, heard Michael Kroger give a whole list of things that have gone wrong. I shouldn't laugh. There's big money for some people are losing. Here's another sign. Last weekend, clearance rates at auctions around the country were way down, just 47%. In fact, O'Neill was so determined not to even discuss all this mess in Parliament, not to answer a straight question about it, that even the Labor-appointed Speaker had finally had enough and told her to be quiet and sit down.
Minister, how many homeowners in your electorate of Hotham are now in negative equity?
These changes will lead to a reverse of 10 years of decline of the home ownership. They want to do absolutely nothing about it. Well, we have a different view, Speaker. We represent all Australians, especially those young people in the gallery.
The Minister conclude her answer. She's not being relevant to the question. Resume your seat. We're moving to the next question.
Not being relevant. There you go. Joining me for this and more, Leith Van Onselen, co-founder of Macro Business and a former Federal Treasury official, and Lisa Goddard, former foreign correspondent and founder of Adoni Media. Leith, how bad is the housing mess?
Look, it's certainly bad for recent first home buyers, Andrew. Around 50,000 people were suckered into the market by the government's 5% deposit scheme, which was introduced in October last year. Then the government obviously has helped engineer a price correction with the budget's changes to capital gains tax and negative gearing. Now Australian house prices are facing their biggest falls in more than 40 years. Sydney prices are already down by 6%, Melbourne's by more than 5%, and the other markets are following. So, you know, many recent first home buyers now, Andrew, risk falling into negative equity with homes that are going to be worth less than their mortgage, which is obviously very bad news for them.
Now, but Lisa, everywhere you look, you're seeing now things falling apart. You've got even Martin Parkinson. Now, I wouldn't have spotted him for a Labor critic, to be honest. He was head of Treasury for 5 prime ministers, including coalition ones, but starting with Labor's Kevin Rudd, saying spending is out of control. It's almost like debt is not an issue for anybody anymore, he says. Where we are in the economic cycle, we should be running significant structural surpluses. Yet we've got a structural and headline deficit we're consuming today, and our children are going to pay for it with their tax burden. Lisa, is Parkinson correct? I mean, it seems like a spendathon, and I'm not sure the government knows what it's doing.
Well, that's exactly what Parkinson said, right? He basically said that the Labor government has pretty much forgotten that debt matters, and it matters because it's not just their continual spending now, and we're seeing the results of that across the economy, but as you said, it's the interest that they're building on that's going to compound and compound and compound, that our children and our grandchildren are looking like having to pick up the bill on, because you can't run a family household like this, and yet the government with our tax dollars is doing exactly that and just putting Australia on this pathway to a never-ending amount of debt. debt. What are they predicting? $1 trillion now. And look, I know it's not, we're talking federal politics at the moment, but let's move aside to another Labor government, Victoria. Their interest bill alone every single day is around $21 million. So the average Australian would be looking at that and say, look, I can't pay my bills and I have to rein in my spending to try to make ends meet. But the government at state, when you're looking at a state Labor government or a federal Labor government, aren't doing that.
It's interesting, isn't it, Leith? Parkinson would come out and say all this, but, you know, what Lisa says and what the figures say, Australia does seem to have lost all discipline in spending. And in some ways, you blame the Liberal government because during the COVID crisis, I know it had to rescue the economy, but it spent money like it was water. And now no one seems to think that debt matters.
Yeah, that's right. So since the pandemic, the federal and state governments have been on absolute spending spree, Andrew. Public spending's at a record high share of GDP. We've got the size of the public sectors across all levels of government has absolutely ballooned. Debt levels are rising and their excessive spending is fueling inflation. It's going to get worse, especially for state governments, because the government's changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax is going to crash stamp duty receipts. So as a result, we're going to see credit rating downgrades across East Coast state governments as well as a result of that. Look, Australia desperately needs fiscal discipline from all levels of government, not just the federal government, but the states as well. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, but I see no sign of that, Lisa. I mean, I have to say, in one area, the government has seemed really disciplined, and that is in its communications, in its projection of unity, conviction, a sense of purpose, even while everything's going to custard down behind them. But do you get any sense that it's realising now that things are getting ragged, it's getting less sure of itself? Am I seeing too much here? What are you detecting?
Oh, Andrew, it's really easy to be disciplined on your message when you're selling the good news, when you're in control of the news cycle. And the Albanese government have had the fortune of being in control of that media cycle now for a number of years. But as you say, the wheels are falling off the cart. And now suddenly you're seeing a Prime Minister who's under pressure. He's being asked some tougher questions than he's used to. He certainly didn't like all of the fallout from the shagging comments and the, goodness knows, dare I mention it, the melons. Watching his performances in those press conferences, he wasn't in control and he did not like it one bit. And now, look at what happened with the Press Club the other week with Tony Burke not being able to present his paper or what he was going to talk about in regards to immigration, because you've got Labor now not in agreement with what they're being forced to decide on, which is a tougher immigration policy. So they're not controlling the narrative anymore, and that's when they're having trouble putting out the messaging that they would prefer all of us Australians to just bow down and listen to, but instead they're actually starting to be questioned on it.
And Leith, you've actually written quite a lot about the immigration crisis, how it's been out of control, how the government keeps setting targets, keeps exceeding them, unfortunately, when it comes to immigration intake. Tony Burke not being able to present that policy to Cabinet and get it approved. What are you taking out of this? I don't see that discipline that you say is needed, and certainly not in immigration numbers.
Yeah. So let's be honest, the federal budget landed like a lead balloon. And Tony Burke obviously cancelled his immigration address last week, and that was reportedly because of internal divisions within Labor. So what I'm seeing, Andrew, is I'm seeing a government that seems to be in a perpetual state of damage control, whether it's to do with the economy, housing, immigration, Melongate, you name it. Basically, across the board, it's lost the narrative, and it seems to be just putting out spot fires or trying to put out spot fires every single day. And that's just basically a sign of a government that is in trouble, in my view.
Lisa, I mean, you've been in the media a long time, not as long as me. You're as fresh as a daisy.
But old,
no, I didn't want to. So that was me backpedaling very rapidly. When I started at the left-wing age newspaper, do they regret giving me my start in journalism? I realised from that moment that the media leaned left, ostracised Conservatives. I saw that once when they did a petition against one journalist that had mocked a women's protest at Pine Gap and signed a petition against him. It's unbelievable. The media is and operates like a club. Yep. And that was sure on show last night at the Logies, as Chris Kenny cleverly noted in his show today, mocking former Logie favourite Carl Stefanovic, who I agree has been a bit foolish. But even comedian Dave Hughes, who's now so horrified by Labor's destruction of Victoria that this old lefty has switched and is now backing Victoria's Liberals. Shame on him, according to Logies. Here we go.
Unfortunately, Karl Stefanovic didn't RSVP tonight, which means we didn't have to hire quite as many bartenders, but we've kept him a spare seat, just in case. It's over there to the right, the far right.
Oh, God, if Pauline Hanson's mouth was this hard to open, wouldn't the world be a better place? All right.
Well, I did notice that inside the venue they've made the carpet gold, and I wondered if that was because they were worried Husey might turn up and have some spillage. So they've thought of ahead.
We have the best factual or documentary category.
Now, best factual is open to anyone.
Anyone.
With the possible exception of Sky News.
Sky News.
Lisa, what do you make of all that?
Look, it's no surprise that they go out in these programs to roast people. Unfortunately, now they are making it political, and they have shown their colours. And can I just say, Andrew, if it's Karl Stefanovic's seat was held to the right, I mean to the far right, well, does that mean all of the ABC was seated to the left, I mean the far left, in that room last night? So that, if you're looking at how they're aligning their political jokes, I just think it was appalling. And look, Dave Hughes has basically said to them, well, I fully backed Labor. I voted for Labor in 2025, and now he's one of them who's walked away and is starting to talk about the serious things that affect real people, taxes, cost of living, what's happening in our property market, and they don't like it. And as for Karl, well, he's off on his own now, doing his own podcast, and he's basically turned his back on a lot of those. And I think we have to praise Nat Barr, because when that right-wing comment was made about Karl, she just sat there and sipped quietly on her champagne. She didn't laugh. She was very classy.
I have to say, Leith, I'm out of time, but I've got to ask you about this. I mean, if a comedian criticises even the appallingly inept Victorian Labor government, which has absolutely destroyed the state and fed organised crime, and that still gets you ostracised at the Logies, my God, what does that say?
Yeah, it says we're in trouble, doesn't it? Look, this whole thing reeks of jealousy and tall poppy syndrome. I'd like to see more people in the media call things out, like Karl and Dave have done, rather than just blindly following like sheep. And unfortunately, we have a media full of sheep.
I'm afraid that's always been the case. Lisa Goddard, Leith Van Onselen, thank you very much to you both. Coming up next, after the break, Jason Ardai found dead after being exposed as an extraordinary liar and a fraud. Is the media really to blame? Jason Ardai was found dead last Friday, and now there's another media controversy. Some on the left claiming yet again, he's bullied by racists, by conservatives all his life, and this time he's been bullied to his death, which makes me wonder how blind and dumb you must be. We've talked here on the show about Ardai a couple of times. He was the youngest black professor in the history of Cambridge, one of the world's most famous universities. He was its diversity poster boy. And what a story of triumph over adversity.
Be the most ridiculous story ever told if the boy who couldn't read and write at 18 gets a PhD before he's 30.
But then his astonishing lies, truly incredible lies, caught up with him. Now, it started when he was accused of plagiarism, of copying nearly verbatim in his doctoral thesis nearly 200 passages from other academics' work. He was also faking quotes. Then other claims that Ardai made turned out to be completely false, like running 30 marathons in 35 days. I mean, people believe that. He even claimed that he'd run some of them with a broken leg. He also lied about fundraising that he'd done, foreign aid work that he'd done, visiting professorships he'd held, apparently. He even lied about appearing on a famous TV show 21 years before he was even born, and so on. Last week, I think it might have got too much. Well, it certainly did. 2 days before he died, even the most central story of Ardai's life was exposed as a lie. The left-wing Guardian, was the first of 3 newspapers to say no, his claim that he didn't speak until he was nearly 12 was false. And the left-wing Atlantic magazine showed that Ardai had gone from claiming that he'd survived testicular cancer that put him in a coma as a child into surviving 2 brain cancers instead. Can you believe that? Joining me from London is our regular Monday commentator, Talk TV host, Samara Gill. Samara, so who did kill Jason Arday.
Look, Andrew, frankly, Jason Arday is ultimately responsible for the death of Jason Arday. That's who killed him. And it's a desperately sad tragedy. You know, he leaves behind 2 young children, and doing what he did should never be the option for anyone. I want to be very frank about that. It is a very terrible set of circumstances. However, a tragic death like he had, it doesn't retrospectively turn legitimate journalism into illegitimate journalism. I mean, we're talking about a guy who painted the journalist that originally went after him as some sort of far-right white supremacist agitator who was from an academic journal type of magazine. He sent a lawyer called Carter Ruck, who over here in the UK is known as, you know, the person who you do not want to have to deal with, someone who will put a slap lawsuit on anyone who tries to interrogate any of his clients. He saw that story killed. He then obviously sent the police after that journalist. So this was messy from top to bottom. And unfortunately, you're right. You know, Twitter and all the social media sites have been an absolute cesspit full of people from the far left and the far right, sort of pointing accusations in every which direction about who is responsible for this. But ultimately, I do think the responsibility lies with Jason Arday, and what a terrible, terrible ending to this story.
I just want to segue from something you just said and say to people who are feeling under pressure, particularly if you've been under the media spotlight. I have been on the end of several media pylons. One in particular was extremely brutal, and I got to tell you, you get through it. You just rely on the judgment of your friends and those who love you, less than on the judgment of your enemies, and you will be right. You'll be surprised how few people don't follow the news and don't believe it anyway. Anyway, I just wonder too, though, Samara, the argument of people who say, well, look, the media's to blame, implying that they shouldn't have covered his lies. Doesn't that actually mean that we don't expose fakes and frauds for fear that they might kill themselves? That would put us in a terrible dilemma and make us quite exposed to a lot of people that mean ill.
Completely. I mean, this is an individual who claimed that he was autistic and obviously was a vulnerable person, but it absolutely doesn't mean that we shouldn't interrogate and investigate. And I think that, you know, we shouldn't let this instance sort of snuff out free speech in this country, in the UK, in Australia and beyond, and good investigative journalism. I agree that potentially the pylon was a little bit too much. It's slow news over here. It's the summertime. But I also think that it shouldn't stop journalists from doing their job. And to see Cambridge's position and how it's so dramatically changed, the fact that they were investigating themselves over what the journalists had almost recommended them to do. Now, they've obviously paused this investigation now, but it shows that there was some wrongdoing here. And as I've said consistently throughout this whole furore, we need to look at the institutions that held him up and created him in their own image and wanted him to be this sort of poster child for them, and put the blame also on them. They should face some accountability, but already Cambridge is chucking it in the direction of the right-wing media and blaming them for this, you know, with the Vice-Chancellor coming out and saying it was an aberration what the media did to him. Well, I think it's an aberration that you put someone like Jason Arday in this position in the first place.
Absolutely. It appointed a man who had cheated on his qualifications, made obviously false claims in his biography, had not supervised any students through to a PhD, which was a qualification supposedly, and was complained of by students he did take on. I mean, seriously. Samara Gill, thank you so much indeed for your time. That's it from me. Coming up next, Sharri Markson. Good night.